A store owner called the cops on a black customer thinking he had everything under control, but just 10 minutes later, the very foundation of his business began to crumble as the truth unraveled in front of a growing crowd. What shocking turn of events would force him to confront his own prejudices and change the course of his life forever? Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. The morning sun spilled through the dusty windows of Thompson's groceries, bathing the shelves of canned goods, cereal boxes, and colorful fresh produce in a soft golden hue. Mr. Thompson, the owner of the small, family-run store, stood behind the counter, meticulously counting the cash from the morning rush. A man of routine and precision, he prided himself on his watchful eye and firm grip on his business. To the regulars, Mr. Thompson was a no-nonsense type. A man who greeted you politely but never with more than a half smile, always quick to spot a misplaced product or a lingering customer. He believed that this vigilance was what kept his store running smoothly in a neighborhood where change often came unwelcome. That day, as Mr. Thompson surveyed the store, his gaze settled on a young man who had just walked in. The man was tall and athletic, with dark skin and a shy demeanor. Jamal, as he would later be known, wore a simple hoodie and jeans. He walked in cautiously, his eyes scanning the shelves as if searching for something specific. Mr. Thompson's jaw tightened, for reasons he didn't fully understand. Perhaps the hoodie or the deliberate way Jamal moved. Mr. Thompson's instincts bristled. He had seen shoplifters before, or so he thought, and something about this young man seemed suspicious. Without evidence, without cause, his mind jumped to conclusions. Jamal wandered through the aisles, picking up a loaf of bread and a bottle of water. Mr. Thompson's gaze bore into him as he moved, the tension in the room thickening. "Can I help you with something?" Mr. Thompson's voice cut sharply through the silence. Jamal looked up, startled. "No, sir, I'm good. Just grabbing a few things." But as Jamal moved toward the register, Mr. Thompson stepped out from behind the counter, his voice rising. "Hold it right there," he said. "What do you have in your pockets?" Jamal blinked in confusion. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Mr. Thompson snapped. "Empty your pockets. I'm not going to let you walk out of here without checking." By now, a couple of other customers had paused their shopping to watch the scene unfold. One of them, a young woman with a smartphone in hand, began recording. Jamal's expression shifted from confusion to frustration. "I'm not stealing anything," he said firmly. "I've got nothing in my pockets except my phone and my keys." "Then show me," Mr. Thompson demanded, his face flushed with suspicion. Jamal hesitated, looking around at the growing audience. "Why should I? I haven't done anything wrong." The tension in the room escalated. Mr. Thompson took another step closer, his voice low and accusing. "If you're innocent, then you have nothing to hide." Reluctantly, Jamal turned out his pockets. As he had said, they contained only a phone and a set of keys. No stolen items, no incriminating evidence. The loaf of bread and bottle of water were still in his hands, waiting to be purchased. But the damage was already done. Jamal's face burned with humiliation as the watching customers murmured among themselves. The woman with the smartphone caught every word, every expression. She lowered her phone briefly to glare at Mr. Thompson. "This is disgusting," she said loudly. "You had no right to treat him like that." Before anyone could respond, the sound of sirens cut through the air. Someone had called the police. Within minutes, 2 officers entered the store. Their calm, professional demeanor stood in sharp contrast to the tension that had gripped the room moments before. "What's going on here?" one of the officers asked. Mr. Thompson launched into his version of events, describing how he had reason to believe Jamal was attempting to shoplift. The officer turned to Jamal, who was still holding the items he intended to buy. "Do you have a receipt or proof of purchase for these?" the officer asked. Jamal shook his head. "I didn't even get to the register yet. He stopped me before I could pay." After a brief review of the situation, including input from witnesses, the officers reached a clear conclusion. "There's no evidence of theft here," one officer said, addressing Mr. Thompson directly. "You need to be careful with accusations like this. False claims can have serious consequences." The officers left, and Jamal, visibly shaken, placed the items on the counter. He looked at Mr. Thompson one last time, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You didn't see me," Jamal said. "You just saw what you wanted to see." With that, he walked out of the store, the woman with the smartphone following closely behind, still recording. Mr. Thompson stood frozen, a pit forming in his stomach. The other customers filed out one by one, leaving the store eerily quiet. It was only later, after closing, that Mr. Thompson discovered the woman's recording online. The video had already been shared thousands of times, the comments filled with outrage. "Racial profiling at its finest," one comment read. "Boycott Thompson's groceries," said another. As Mr. Thompson stared at the screen, a cold wave of realization washed over him. This was more than just a misunderstanding. This was the beginning of something he could no longer control. The morning after the incident, Mr. Thompson sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring blankly at the news feed on his phone. He hadn't slept. The video of the altercation had gone viral overnight, spreading faster than he could comprehend. It was no longer just a video. It had become a symbol, igniting conversations about racial profiling and bias in small businesses. The headline on one local news website read, "Grocery store owner accuses innocent young man of shoplifting. Caught on camera." Beneath it, the video played on an endless loop, each view multiplying the anger of the internet. Mr. Thompson scrolled through the comments, his stomach sinking further with every passing second. "This is unacceptable behavior in our community. Racism has no place here. Shut this store down. Does he even realize how much harm he's caused?" He threw the phone down on the table, rubbing his temples. For years, Thompson's groceries had been a staple of the neighborhood. It was small, yes, but it was his pride and joy, a testament to his years of hard work. Now, it felt as though everything was slipping away faster than he could grasp. By mid-morning, the fallout began to manifest in the real world. As he opened the store's shutters, a small group of protesters was already gathered outside. They carried signs that read, "Justice for Jamal," and "End racial profiling." A few customers who approached the store saw the scene and quickly turned away, shaking their heads. Inside, the store felt emptier than usual, the normal hum of activity replaced by an oppressive silence. His cashier, Sophie, a college student who had worked for him for 2 years, watched the protesters nervously through the window. "Do you think they'll leave soon?" she asked. Mr. Thompson shrugged, his voice gruff. "They'll tire themselves out. People always do." But as the day wore on, the protests grew larger. Community leaders joined the crowd, along with journalists and local activists. The sound of chanting echoed down the street, and customers avoided the store entirely. By the end of the day, the register was almost empty, and Mr. Thompson was left staring at shelves of unsold inventory. That evening, Sophie confronted him as they closed the store. "Mr. Thompson," she began hesitantly, "you know people are angry for a reason. That video, it doesn't look good. You didn't even give Jamal a chance." Mr. Thompson bristled. "I was doing my job, protecting my business." "From what?" Sophie challenged. "He didn't do anything wrong. You accused him because of how he looked." Her words stung, and for a moment, Mr. Thompson couldn't find a reply. Instead, he waved her off, muttering, "You don't understand." By the next day, the situation had worsened. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like #BoycottThompsons and #JusticeForJamal. News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting clips of the confrontation alongside commentary about systemic racism in small businesses. Jamal, though reluctant to speak at first, eventually gave a short interview to a local journalist. "I wasn't doing anything wrong," he said, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. "I was just trying to buy a loaf of bread and some water. But to him, I didn't belong there." His words spread like wildfire, turning Jamal into a local hero and Mr. Thompson into a pariah. Sales plummeted, and the store became the focal point of a growing boycott. Vendors began calling to check on their invoices, subtly implying that they wouldn't renew their contracts if the backlash continued. At night, the loneliness hit hardest. Mr. Thompson would sit in his small living room, staring at the empty walls. The pride he once felt in his store had been replaced by a gnawing regret he didn't know how to articulate. For the first time in years, he questioned himself. Had he been wrong? Was Sophie right? Had he allowed his biases he didn't even realize he held, to cloud his judgment? One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mr. Thompson heard a knock on his door. He opened it to find Sophie standing there, holding her phone. "You should see this," she said, handing it to him. It was a new video, this one from Jamal. Sitting on a park bench, he addressed the camera with calm but firm conviction. "I don't hate Mr. Thompson," he said. "But what happened to me is bigger than just one man or one store. It's about how we see each other, how we treat each other, and it's about accountability." Jamal's words struck a chord. "Mr." Thompson stared at the screen, his throat tightening. "He doesn't hate me," he muttered, almost to himself. Sophie sighed. "He doesn't want you to fail, Mr. Thompson. He just wants you to do better." The words lingered in the air long after Sophie left. For the first time, Mr. Thompson allowed himself to fully confront what he had done. He replayed the incident in his mind, not just what he had said, but the way he had felt, the assumptions he had made. This wasn't just about a single mistake. It was about everything that had led to that moment. His biases, his fears, his unwillingness to see people as more than the stereotypes he carried in his mind. The next morning, as he unlocked the store, he noticed the protesters had thinned, but their signs remained, propped up on the sidewalk like silent reminders. Mr. Thompson stood there for a moment, staring at the words painted in bold letters. "Change starts here." For the first time in days, he felt something shift, not in the world outside, but within himself. A small, hesitant seed of resolve began to take root. It was time to change. The next morning, as the first rays of light broke through the gray sky, Mr. Thompson stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. His face was tired, his eyes heavy from sleepless nights, but something in him felt different. The words he'd read on those protest signs, Jamal's calm but piercing statement in the video, these lingered in his mind. Change starts here. He arrived at the store early, determined to face the protesters, the community, and most importantly, himself. As he approached the front door, he noticed Sophie standing outside, her arms crossed and her face uncertain. Behind her, the remaining protesters had resumed their chants. "Morning," he muttered. "Morning," Sophie replied cautiously. "You sure you're ready for this?" Mr. Thompson nodded, though he didn't feel entirely confident. "It's time I face them." That afternoon, as the protests began to swell once more, Mr. Thompson did something no one expected. He walked out of his store and approached the crowd. For a moment, the chanting faltered, replaced by murmurs of confusion and curiosity. A young man with a megaphone, one of the organizers, lowered it, raising an eyebrow at Mr. Thompson. "I want to talk," Mr. Thompson said, his voice shaking slightly. "I need to talk." The protesters looked at one another, skeptical but intrigued. Slowly, the young man nodded, gesturing for him to speak. Mr. Thompson hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, and I know no apology can undo what I did to Jamal, or what it says about me." He paused, his voice cracking. "But I'm here because I want to make it right. I don't know how yet, but I'm asking for help. I'm asking you to show me." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then Sophie stepped forward, her expression softening. "It's a start," she said, "but words aren't enough." Jamal's voice cut through the crowd. "She's right." All eyes turned as Jamal emerged, walking toward Mr. Thompson. He stood tall, his expression calm but resolute. "If you're serious about making things right, it's going to take more than an apology," Jamal said. "It's going to take action. You have to show us you're willing to change, not just for me, but for everyone who walks into your store." Mr. Thompson nodded, his voice trembling as he replied, "Tell me what to do." The next few days marked the beginning of a transformation. Mr. Thompson started by listening, really listening, to the people he had dismissed for so long. Sophie, who stayed by his side despite her doubts, helped organize a meeting in the store's back room. Community leaders, protesters, and even Jamal attended, each sharing their frustrations, experiences, and suggestions for change. "You need to create a space where everyone feels welcome," one woman said. "Offer jobs to young people in the community," another added. Make this store about more than just profit, Jamal said. Make it a place that gives back. Mr. Thompson took notes, his hand trembling as he wrote. Every suggestion felt like a reminder of how far he had to go, but it also gave him a path forward. One of the first steps he took was volunteering at a community food drive organized by Jamal's church. The experience was humbling. He spent hours handing out groceries, hearing stories from families who struggled to make ends meet. Many of them had shopped at his store for years, but now looked at him with guarded eyes. He met their gazes with quiet determination, knowing trust would take time to rebuild. Jamal worked alongside him, handing out bags of food with practiced ease. During a rare quiet moment, Mr. Thompson turned to him. "Thank you for giving me this chance," he said. Jamal shrugged. "It's not about me giving you a chance. It's about what you do with it." Back at the store, Mr. Thompson began making visible changes. A community feedback board was installed near the entrance, inviting customers to leave suggestions or concerns. He hired 2 part-time employees from the neighborhood, both young people who had struggled to find work. He also reached out to local organizations to host events in the store, everything from financial literacy workshops to cultural celebrations. Sophie noticed the shift, though she kept her optimism cautious. "You're making progress," she said one day as they restocked shelves. "But it's not just about doing things. It's about being better." "I know," Mr. Thompson replied. "This is just the beginning." Weeks later, the protests outside the store had dwindled. Some community members still avoided Thompson's groceries, but others began to return, drawn by curiosity or cautious hope. One afternoon, as Mr. Thompson rang up a customer's groceries, the doorbell chimed. He looked up to see Jamal standing in the entrance. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jamal walked up to the counter, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I hear you're hosting an open house next week," Jamal said. Mr. Thompson nodded. "I am. I want to hear from everyone. And I mean everyone." "I'll be there," Jamal said. He paused, then added, "You've got a long way to go, but at least you're walking." As Jamal turned to leave, Mr. Thompson felt something he hadn't felt in weeks: hope. The open house at Thompson's Groceries arrived on a crisp Saturday afternoon, the autumn air carrying a hint of renewal. Mr. Thompson stood by the front entrance, his palms damp with nervous anticipation. The community had been invited to share feedback, voice concerns, and, most importantly, begin a dialogue. Sophie had helped with the setup, folding chairs arranged in neat rows, a small podium at the front, and refreshments on a side table. By noon, the store began to fill. Families trickled in, some hesitant, others curious. Among them were familiar faces, customers who had once been regulars but had since avoided the store. Protesters arrived as well, their arms crossed but their eyes scanning the changes. Mr. Thompson greeted each person with a polite nod, his humility evident in every gesture. Jamal entered last, his presence quiet yet commanding. As he stepped inside, the room seemed to shift. Conversations paused momentarily, people glancing at him and then back at Mr. Thompson. The tension between the two was the silent undercurrent of the event, but Jamal's steady gaze conveyed something deeper than animosity: expectation. When it was time to speak, Mr. Thompson approached the podium, his hands gripping the edges. He cleared his throat, his voice wavering as he began. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know many of you are here because I hurt this community. I failed to live up to the trust you placed in me, and for that, I am truly sorry." The room was silent, save for the occasional rustle of coats and shuffling feet. He continued, his voice growing steadier. "This store has been a part of this neighborhood for years, but I now realize it hasn't truly belonged to the community. That's going to change. I'm here to listen, to learn, and to rebuild the trust one broke." He stepped back, his heart pounding. For a moment, there was no reaction. Then, Sophie stood and gestured for others to speak. A woman in the back raised her hand. "I've shopped here for years, Mr. Thompson, but I never felt like you saw me. You were polite but distant. That needs to change." A man near the front added, "We need this store to reflect who we are, our culture, our values. Host events. Carry products that matter to us." Jamal finally stood. The room hushed as he spoke. Actions speak louder than words, he said simply. "This is a start, but you've got to keep showing up, Mr. Thompson. Not just for today, but for every day after." Mr. Thompson nodded, swallowing hard. "I will." The open house marked a turning point. Over the following weeks, Mr. Thompson worked tirelessly to implement the suggestions he had received. He expanded the store's inventory to include culturally diverse products, creating a dedicated section for local and international foods. He partnered with community organizations to host events, a financial planning workshop, a free flu shot clinic, and even a cooking class taught by a local chef. One of the most impactful changes was the creation of a loyalty program that rewarded regular customers with discounts and occasional free items. On the program's launch day, Mr. Thompson stood at the register, handing out cards to customers personally. "Thank you for giving us another chance," he said to each person, his sincerity unmistakable. Slowly but surely, the community began to respond. Foot traffic increased, and familiar faces started reappearing. Sophie noticed the shift, smiling as she saw customers linger longer in the aisles, chatting with each other and occasionally with Mr. Thompson himself. One evening, as the store was closing, Mr. Thompson found Jamal browsing near the fresh produce section. He approached cautiously, unsure if the young man would welcome his presence. "Jamal," he said, "thank you for coming." Jamal looked up, his expression neutral, but not unfriendly. "The place feels different now. You're doing good work." "Still a lot to do," Mr. Thompson admitted. "But I'm trying." Jamal nodded, picking up an apple and inspecting it. "Keep at it." For the first time in weeks, Mr. Thompson felt the weight on his chest lift just a little. Jamal's words weren't a forgiveness. At least, not entirely. But they were a start. The true test of Mr. Thompson's efforts came during the store's first major community event, a fall festival. The store's parking lot was transformed into a vibrant gathering space, complete with local vendors, live music, and activities for kids. Mr. Thompson had organized the event as a way to give back to the neighborhood and show his commitment to fostering unity. Families arrived in droves, children laughing as they played games and adults mingling over cups of cider. Sophie managed the raffle table, beaming as she watched the store come alive in a way it never had before. Even the protesters who had once stood outside with signs came to see the transformation. Jamal was there too, volunteering at a booth for a local youth program. At one point, he and Mr. Thompson found themselves standing side by side, watching the festivities unfold. "This is what it should have always been," Jamal said quietly. Mr. Thompson nodded, his voice soft. "I couldn't see it before, but I see it now." For the first time, Jamal smiled, a small but genuine expression of hope. "Keep building, Mr. Thompson. We'll build with you." The fall festival ended with a heartfelt speech from Mr. Thompson, thanking the community for their patience, their feedback, and their willingness to hold him accountable. As the crowd dispersed, many stopped to shake his hand or offer words of encouragement. When the last car pulled out of the parking lot, Mr. Thompson stood alone under the glowing store sign, his heart full. For the first time, he felt truly connected to the people around him, not just as customers, but as neighbors, friends, and partners in a shared journey toward understanding and growth. It wasn't just a store anymore. It was a bridge. Winter descended on the neighborhood, and with it came a sense of renewal. The events of the past few months had reshaped not only Mr. Thompson's store, but also his understanding of the role it played in the community. Where once Thompson's Groceries had been a static, business-as-usual operation, it was now a place of connection, bustling with life. The most anticipated event of the season was the store's first community day, held just a week before the holidays. This was Mr. Thompson's way of showing gratitude and reaffirming his commitment to the neighborhood. The event featured free meals for families in need, a coat donation drive, and a festive atmosphere with decorations and holiday music. The morning of the event, Mr. Thompson arrived early, as usual, but this time with a sense of purpose that felt almost unrecognizable from the man he had been just a few months earlier. He moved through the store, checking every detail. The tables were set, the donation boxes placed near the entrance, and the catering team had started unpacking hot meals. Sophie arrived soon after, carrying a tray of homemade cookies she'd baked for the event. "You nervous?" she asked, placing the cookies on a table. "A little, Mr. Thompson admitted, straightening his tie. "But it's a good kind of nervous." By mid-morning, families began to arrive. Some came for the free meals, others to drop off donations, and many simply to enjoy the festive atmosphere. A local choir sang carols near the entrance, and volunteers helped children make holiday crafts at a small table set up near the registers. The store, once shrouded in tension and mistrust, now felt alive with warmth and joy. Even customers who had previously boycotted the store returned, their guarded expressions softening as they saw the changes Mr. Thompson had implemented. Jamal arrived late in the afternoon, carrying a bag of coats to donate. He was greeted warmly by Sophie, who showed him where to place the donations. As he moved through the store, he noticed the changes. The feedback board now filled with notes and suggestions, the shelves stocked with diverse products, and the employees, many of them new, reflecting the diversity of the neighborhood. Mr. Thompson spotted Jamal and walked over, his smile genuine but still tinged with humility. "Glad you could make it," he said. "Wouldn't miss it," Jamal replied, his tone lighter than it had been in their previous encounters. "This is different, in a good way." "It's because of you," Mr. Thompson said earnestly. "Because you didn't let me get away with what I did. You held me accountable." Jamal considered this, then nodded. "Accountability is important, but so is forgiveness. You've earned some of that today." The words landed softly but powerfully, and for the first time, Mr. Thompson felt a true sense of peace. It wasn't about absolution. It was about the ongoing effort to do better every single day. As the event continued, Mr. Thompson made a point to speak with everyone who attended. Some shared their gratitude for the store's transformation. Others still voiced concerns, which he listened to attentively, promising to address them. One elderly man approached him with a smile. "You've come a long way, Thompson," he said. "Used to think you were just another stubborn old store owner. But I see you've got a heart under all that gruffness." Mr. Thompson chuckled, his ears reddening. "It's taken me long enough to show it, hasn't it?" The event culminated in a raffle, with prizes donated by local businesses. Jamal helped draw the winning tickets, his presence serving as a quiet reminder of the journey the store and its owner had undertaken. When the final prize, a holiday dinner basket, went to a single mother and her 2 children, the room erupted in applause. As the last guests left and the store quieted, Mr. Thompson found himself standing by the front door, looking out at the snow-dusted street. Sophie joined him, wrapping a scarf around her neck. "You did good today," she said. "The store feels like it belongs to the community now." Mr. Thompson smiled, his breath visible in the cold air. "It's not just a store, Sophie. It's me. For so long, I thought I was just running a business. But it's more than that. I'm part of something bigger now." Sophie grinned. "Guess it's never too late to learn." Over the following weeks, the momentum continued. Mr. Thompson worked with community leaders to establish an ongoing partnership with local charities, ensuring the store could provide resources for those in need. He launched a mentorship program for young people in the neighborhood, offering part-time jobs and guidance to help them build skills and confidence. Jamal, who had initially kept his distance, began to take a more active role in these efforts. He spoke at one of the store's workshops for teens, sharing his own experiences and encouraging them to stand up for what was right. The relationship between Mr. Thompson and Jamal, once defined by conflict, evolved into something unexpected: mutual respect. As the year drew to a close, Mr. Thompson stood in the middle of his store, now bustling with customers preparing for the holidays. The once quiet aisles were alive with laughter and conversation, and the tension that had hung over the store like a storm cloud was gone. Jamal stopped by that evening, his hands in his pockets as he watched a family pick out holiday treats. "Looks like you're finally where you need to be," he said. Mr. Thompson nodded. "Thanks to you. And everyone else who refused to let me stay the same." Jamal smiled, the warmth in his expression unmistakable. "Keep it up. We're all watching." As Jamal left, Mr. Thompson turned to gaze at the community he had once taken for granted. For the first time, he didn't see customers or strangers. He saw neighbors, friends, family, and he knew the work was far from over. But for the first time, he welcomed it. Winter's chill gave way to the promise of spring, and with it came a sense of renewal, not just for Thompson's groceries, but for the community itself. The store, once a symbol of division, now stood as a testament to the power of accountability, growth, and shared purpose. Its shelves were stocked with items requested by customers, its walls adorned with artwork from local youth, and its aisles alive with conversation and laughter. For Mr. Thompson, the journey had been humbling. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to learn and connect. What had once been a solitary existence, focused solely on his own success, had blossomed into something far richer, a life intertwined with the people around him. As spring approached, Mr. Thompson decided to host the store's first-ever holiday celebration, a community Easter festival. It was a chance to bring everyone together in celebration of not just the season, but the progress they had made as a neighborhood. The preparations began weeks in advance. Sophie, as always, was his right-hand person, coordinating volunteers and arranging activities. Jamal, now a quiet but consistent presence in Mr. Thompson's life, suggested hosting an egg hunt for the kids. Local businesses donated prizes, while customers pitched in with decorations and baked goods. On the day of the event, the store's parking lot was transformed into a vibrant gathering space. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, and tables laden with food and games stretched as far as the eye could see. Families arrived in droves, their children racing to find hidden eggs while parents mingled and shared stories. At one point, Jamal found Mr. Thompson standing near the refreshment table, watching the festivities with a quiet smile. "You look like you're actually enjoying yourself," Jamal teased. "I am," Mr. Thompson admitted. "I never realized how much I was missing before. He gestured to the scene before them. "This feels right." Jamal nodded. "It does." That evening, after the last banner had been taken down and the final guest had left, Mr. Thompson sat alone in his office. The ledger lay open on his desk, but for once, he wasn't focused on numbers. Instead, he thumbed through the stack of thank you notes left by attendees. One note caught his eye. It was written in a child's uneven handwriting, accompanied by a crayon drawing of the store. "Thank you for making this place fun and happy for everyone. I like coming here now. Love, Mia." He smiled, feeling a lump form in his throat. It was a small gesture, but it carried an immense weight. He carefully pinned the note to the bulletin board above his desk, where he could see it every day. In the weeks that followed, Mr. Thompson threw himself into new projects. The mentorship program expanded, offering scholarships to students pursuing college or trade school. A new policy was implemented to ensure the store's hiring practices prioritized inclusivity and diversity. He also began hosting monthly forums in the store's back room, inviting community members to discuss ideas, voice concerns, and share updates. Jamal became a regular at these forums, his voice carrying significant weight as a bridge between Mr. Thompson and the community. Spring turned to summer, and the store continued to thrive. But the true transformation wasn't in the profits or the foot traffic. It was in the relationships. The walls that had once separated Mr. Thompson from his neighbors had crumbled, replaced by connections built on trust and shared purpose. One evening, Mr. Thompson hosted a small dinner at the store to thank the key figures who had helped him along the way. Sophie was there, beaming with pride. Jamal sat beside her, still reserved, but noticeably at ease. As they shared a meal, laughter and stories filled the room. At one point, Sophie raised her glass. "To Mr. Thompson," she said, "for proving that it's never too late to change, and for reminding all of us that growth is a journey we take together." The room erupted in applause. Mr. Thompson, his face red with embarrassment, raised his glass in return. "To all of you," he said, "for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to." As the evening wound down, Mr. Thompson stepped outside to catch a breath of fresh air. The store sign glowed softly in the twilight, its light reflecting off the windows of the bustling neighborhood it served. He thought back to the man he had been only months earlier, closed off, suspicious, unwilling to see beyond his own biases. That man felt like a distant memory now. Jamal joined him, leaning against the railing. "You've come a long way," he said. "So have we all," Mr. Thompson replied. Jamal smiled. "What's next for you?" Mr. Thompson looked out at the street, where neighbors greeted each other warmly and children played under the fading sun. I keep going, he said. Keep learning. Keep building. Because this isn't the end, it's just the beginning. As they stood there, side by side, the hum of the neighborhood enveloped them. A symphony of voices, laughter, and hope. It was a sound Mr. Thompson had come to cherish. A reminder that transformation wasn't just possible, it was powerful. And it started, as it always would, with the courage to take the first step.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so we can keep bringing you the best stories.